Yes, I'm ready. Hi, you guys. Good morning. It's Thursday. As usual, here we are. And this morning, boy, oh boy, do we have a really great conversation coming. So I've been hinting at it and alluding to it a little bit, but really, honestly, we're going to talk about hiring, right? So times have changed. So has the way we need to approach hiring. You can't just post a job ad and expect qualified candidates to come flooding in. Oh, and by the way, if you're wondering, this is my friend Kate. And Kate is a business attorney. And so we're going to do this together because there are so many different parts of this conversation, right? And so just bringing in everybody that we can to help in this way. So like even before COVID, when things were what we used to call normal, this would have been a daunting task. It was like the biggest issue that my clients who are established business owners would have is hiring and the whole hiring process. But now, post COVID, or not really post COVID because we're not post anything, but on this side of it, with our employment rate being 3.8%, which just blows my mind, there's so much more to navigate. So that's why Kate and I are here. We are really committed to sharing both strategies, that's me, and the legal side, legal side. We're backwards, so that's always confusing. The legal side of finding and hiring employees in today's world, but not just any employees, but the right employees for the seats that are open in your business, the right people for the right seats. Okay, so here's how we're going to do this. We're going to ask each other questions, and then we're going to answer each other's questions. And if you have questions, we want you to put them in the chat, and we'll address those as well. If you have, yes, so put your stuff in the chat. Always, I always have this little preamble, right? If you're listening live, let us know. Say hi. Of course, put your questions in so that we can answer them. If you're listening to the replay, let us know that too, especially if you have questions, and add your questions even if you're listening to the replay, because Kate and I will come back and we'll look and see if anybody has any questions and we'll answer them, because that's what we do. If you want the notes, so what are notes? So the notes are, we take the transcript and we put it in a way that you can actually read them where it makes sense so that you can get all the salient points. So if I am live, thank you very much. An error occurred. I hate it when technology goes nuts. So if you're watching and something is weird, can you just put that in the chat? Okay, so if you want the notes, let me know. It does take my team about a week and a half to get them ready to be published, but then I'll send them directly to your messenger or private message box from whatever channel that you're watching this from, because we're on Facebook profile and business and LinkedIn, okay? But I promise that if you say you want them, you will get them, okay? Okay, so let's start with Kate. Kate, can you tell us a little bit about your law practice, and then ask your first question?
Yes. So, hi, thank you so much for having me, Dana. It's always fun to see you and talk with you. Just to give you a little bit about my background, I am a lawyer. I have been in practice for 21 years now. I graduated from Harvard Law School and went to Washington, D.C. and started my practice there in a big corporate law firm. And I really started out as an estate planning attorney, and I still do quite a bit of estate planning. That's sort of my first love. But as over time, one of my very first mentors told me estate planning lawyers are sort of the last generalists, and that has proved to be true. So over those 21 years, I've had the opportunity to learn a lot of other areas of law. And so I also am now working with both business and nonprofit clients on sort of just general business matters. I also know a little bit about nonprofit law. So, and those are sort of my three practice areas. So estate planning, business, and nonprofits. So thank you so much again for having me. And my first question for you is just if you could tell us, what are you seeing about how the pandemic has impacted employment status and what employees are really looking for in today's environment?
Well, mostly. So I actually think this is good, even if it is creating a much tighter job market, right? Which is that people are no longer willing to work themselves to the bone or work so hard for so little in return. And when I say so little in return, I'm not just talking about compensation. I'm talking about quality of life. I'm talking about quality of work. I'm talking about trust. I'm talking about belonging. Like, it has changed the place of work inside the bigger container of somebody's life. Um, right, life, the importance placed on their life has grown, and while the job is, of course, having a job, of course, is really important, and 100% you need money to pay for your life and to have a living wage and all those things. The impact of what you're doing during the time that you're at work, and who you're doing it with, and how you're treated at work, that emphasis has really blown up, and so the market has just changed. So.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you a follow-up question, if you don't mind. I know we were going to kind of go back and forth, but I'm changing things up on you. It really plays into what you just said, that one of the surveys that I saw recently, it was talking about, it was noticeable, and it was sort of saying like what employees are saying they're looking for in a job. And the first two were sort of salary and flexible schedule. But then the second question on the survey was, what keeps you at an employer? And the number one answer there was not salary or flexible schedule. It was whether they were feeling fulfilled. And so I'd love to hear what thoughts you have on, how can employers really provide that fulfilling experience that employees are looking for in this job market?
Well, I always think that the most important thing is communication. Always is to ask.
Okay.
Right? That's part of it. But I also think that there's like, what does fulfillment mean to the person who is the employee? Like, what does that actually mean to them? We talk a lot in the entrepreneurial circles about what success means and how personal success actually is. Well, that's the truth for fulfillment as well. Some people are really fulfilled when they feel like they belong to a team that cares about them, or that they're part of something that is in it together, doing something, producing some result together as a team, and that their work, no matter what piece of that they have, is just as important as anybody else's result that they're doing in the picture of the greater whole. Does that make sense? Yeah. But I also think that fulfillment can be, if you have a job for a specific length of time, let's say, or you're planning on being with a company for a few years, one of the really important things that I think is crucial for an employer to think about and to talk about is who are you going to be if you have this job? Who can you be at the end of 3 years? What can you know that you don't know now? How will you increase your I don't want to say resume, because that's not it, but your own abilities and the way you take on the world, your confidence, all those things I think are part of being fulfilled. So that's what I think. Okay, I get to ask a question.
Yes, your turn.
Okay, so what does a business owner need to take into account when deciding between hiring an employee or an independent contractor?
Yeah, that's a really great and frequent question that's come up a lot. Even pre-COVID, that was becoming more and more of an issue. And I think now, particularly in the gig economy, where there's more and more people who are sort of doing this great resignation and kind of wanting to hang their own shingle, there's a lot more people who may want to be an independent contractor. The reason that it matters is that under the law, there are certain rights that are available to employees that are not available to independent contractors. On the flip side, there are certain rights that are available to employers that when they have employees versus independent contractors. Like, for example,
hold on a second, Kate. Just hold on
sure.
1 second.
Yep.
For some reason, hold on. We just are having a technical difficulty here. Huh. Okay.
I'm seeing that pop up too, but I don't know how to fix it.
Yep, I'm going to fix it. I think I'm going to fix it. Yeah. I hate when this kind of stuff happens. So hold on. Okay, what time? Oh. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to fix it after the fact. So
okay.
I'm sorry if I interrupted you.
No worries. Yeah, no worries.
Okay, cool. So I did totally catch that it's a question that's asked so often. And okay, so let's go from there.
Right. And so I think it helps to think about, well, why does it matter, right? I mean, why do we need to know the answer to this question? And what I had started to say earlier is that on the employee side, you have certain rights under certain statutes, both federal and state statutes, that you don't necessarily get under an independent contractor arrangement. So things like minimum wage or wage and hour laws, which are intended to make sure that employees get paid on time. And so that's one reason. And then on the employer side, there's also, there are things that you want to be noticeable, that you want to be available. That you want to know about as you're making this determination. So, for example, an employer can be vicariously liable for an employee that does something wrong on the job, whereas that's not the case if you have an independent contractor. Another big area where this comes up is intellectual property. So if an employee develops intellectual property, it's generally presumed to be the property of the employer. Whereas if you're doing it as an independent contractor, the independent contractor generally is presumed to own the intellectual property. So there's just a number of reasons why it matters to sort of classify what type of employee, what type of relationship you have, so that you know which rules apply. And so, there's a number of tests for a number of different reasons. There's a number of different laws that affect an employment relationship, everything from tax withholding to workers' compensation to the FLSA, which is federal minimum wage laws. And so, the tests honestly are all different. They're generally based on a series of factors that look at things like, who's directing the work. How permanent is the relationship? How are they getting paid? Who's paying the expenses? Who profits or takes a loss from a business? And so there's no real hard and fast rule to sort of say this is definitely an employment relationship versus an independent contractor relationship, but it is something you want to be really careful about. And also, periodically go back and audit. If you've had an employee that's maybe now more part-time and working from home and taking on other clients, do you want to maybe consider switching them to independent contractor status?
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear you say that, because especially in Oregon, which is where I'm based, but there are people who are watching this all up and down the West Coast and even some on the East Coast. Every state has its own litmus tests that I know. And I've been told in Oregon that if it smells like an employee, you got to have it be an employee. Like there are laws around this are more stringent here than they are even for the IRS.
And that's true. That's true. So that Oregon tends to define an employee really broadly. And so what I have seen and experienced is, the various regulatory agencies coming in, particularly tax agencies, Department of Revenue, and really wanting people to be withholding income taxes and, saying, this is an employment relationship. You're not an independent contractor. So the employer has to withhold for taxes.
Yeah, right. Great. Thank you. I can't tell you how often that question comes up in my work with my clients. So thank you so much.
Sure. I will say one more thing is that there are financial considerations too. I think I was really focusing on the legal considerations. I think there's some belief out there that you can hire an independent contractor maybe less expensively, or is maybe more expensive to the employer than an employee is, that maybe the employee is more financially beneficial. And I really think it depends. I think it really depends on the situation. So, my advice would be to look at the financials, not just to assume that one is going to be better or worse for the employer.
I also think part of that piece is that people are actually don't know as much that they can hire all the rules around hiring part-time employees, right? Like they think that they have to hire contractors because they're not going to have a really specific schedule perhaps, or a specific, what looks like a standard employment hours, and right. And so they're like, oh, okay, then that has to be a contractor. But there's actually a lot you can hire people in all sorts of ways and have them be your employee.
Right.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. You asked me 2 questions, so I'm going to ask you another question.
Oh, okay. Right.
Okay. Yep. So I want you to talk to me about employment contracts. So this is like got a multiple, there's some multiple ideas here. Okay. So when does it make sense to have an employment contract, and can employment contracts be used to have employees commit or incentivize them to commit to a year's worth or 2 years of employment? And how can it be incentivized? And then I don't know, the thing that came up, I had this conversation yesterday with a client, and, can you add a bonus at the end if they make it all the way to a year? Is that legal? And then what are the penalties for breaking the contract, both for the employer and the employee?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and also one that comes up quite a bit. So just to be really clear, in most states, I think probably all states, honestly, but definitely in Oregon, employment relationships are assumed to be at will, which means that either the employee or the employer can terminate at any time for any reason. So there doesn't have to be just cause. There can be a downturn in the economy, and the employer just needs to lay some people off, even though they're superstars. And so you want to be really careful, again, about whether you want that relationship, which has its benefits, particularly for the employer, in terms of, you don't have to document cause, to terminate someone's employment. And so that's generally preferred by employers, is to maintain it for at-will, to maintain the at-will status. There are reasons why you might want to have an employment contract, and generally this is for more sort of high-level managerial positions, is where people tend to do employment contracts, and they do them exactly for the reasons that you're asking about. So you've got, maybe you have a really talented person and you want to give them an incentive to accept your offer instead of somebody else's. So you may incentivize them that, if they meet certain performance measurements, that they'll get bonuses at certain points along the way, or if they stay for a year, they'll get a bonus at a certain point. And so that's one reason why you might do an employment contract, is exactly what you're asking about. The other reason is maybe it's a position where it's really hard to find someone who's qualified. And so instead of, wanting somebody to just be able to quit whenever, the next thing comes along, you want to have some sort of contractual agreement that they need to give you, 90 days or 6 months or whatever, however long you think it might take you to find a replacement. So that's another reason why you might have an employment contract. Also, if you're doing something where you've got a lot of trade secrets and intellectual property, the employment contract, you can put in protections about having the person, if they leave, they can't compete with you, they can't take employees, they can't take trade secrets with them. So those are all reasons why you would do an employment contract instead of just having them at will. In terms of what it means is, again, it's a two-way street, right? So there are advantages and disadvantages. So if it doesn't work out, for example, so let's say you have a 2-year contract with somebody, and after 6 months you realize it's just not working out. They're not the right fit. They're not what you thought you needed, or they're not what you thought they were going to be able to bring. So if you choose to terminate at 6 months, you probably are going to be on the hook to some extent. So what it really means is you've got to renegotiate the contract. So you can't just fire them just because you want to at will, essentially. Most likely what's going to happen is you'll have to go back and renegotiate the contract, and they have a contractual right to the money that you have promised to pay them over that 2-year period. So you may have to liquidate damages in that case. There was a case of a company that hired a whole new C-suite and promised them all 6-figure bonuses right in March of 2020. And then, as we all know, COVID came into the picture, and this company was on the hook for millions of dollars because they had to let people go. They didn't have the revenue to support the company. And so that's one of those things where, yes, there are advantages and there are disadvantages. And on the flip side as well. So if the employee commits to 2 years and wants out at 6 months, you have a right to sort of renegotiate your contract as well. What you don't have, I mean, in this country, we don't have involuntary servitude, so you can't actually make them stay for 2 years, but you can say, this damages my business in a way, I'm not going to pay out this, the salary that I had promised you, et cetera.
Got it. Okay.
You can actually penalize for that type of thing, but I don't know. I don't like that. I like better doing sort of the carrot rather than the stick.
I absolutely have to agree. This really came up because this particular client is looking for a particular skill set and has been looking for quite a while in this job market, of which there isn't anybody. And somebody from another state, they're a little bit in the middle of nowhere, have said, "Oh, I want to move to Portland. And they have the skills for the job." And she was like, "Well, what if we bring her here, hire her, and she either decides she hates Portland, which could happen, or she just used it to get here, but doesn't actually stick around? Like, can I have her sign? Can we do an employment contract?" The thing about the skill is that it's not terribly, terribly advanced. She's right. It's just a particular skill that she has that's been hard to find. So this is really great. Thank you so much. As soon as I actually told her that as soon as we're done, I'm sending her the link to this because she's not on social media at all. Like, we're going to talk about this.
Yeah.
Okay. Before you ask me the question, Jen she says, "I'm late joining this. What about non-competes?" Okay. So what about non-competes? And for her in particular, it's about licensed massage therapists. If they go, like, how do you keep people from going down the street and opening a business that's competitive with your own when they've been an employee?
So that's one of those situations where if that's something in your industry that you're worried about, that would be a reason to have a non-compete provision in an employment contract. And so I don't know specifically about licensed massage therapists. So, different industries have different rules. So, for example, lawyers are regulated. Lawyers, we're not allowed to have non-competes with each other. So you'd have to look up or talk to a lawyer who could look up the specific rules for massage therapists. But that is definitely one of the reasons why you might choose to have an employment contract. It's just being aware that you're therefore giving up that flexibility of the at-will employment, which basically allows you to just terminate employment at any time for any reason.
That's great. Awesome.
Yeah.
Your turn.
Oh, my turn. Sorry. Okay. In my last questions, I was asking you about, how can employers really make the employment experience feel fulfilling? Can you also talk about, what else are employees really looking for in this job market? And, and then speak to, specific steps that an employer might take, maybe it's particularly for small and mid-sized businesses, without going broke.
Yeah. Right. So, whenever we think about adding things to a compensation program, the first thing employers think about is, oh, it's going to cost money, right? And there are always costs associated with any kind of compensation, but when we go beyond money, okay, so yes, of course, employees want a wage that's commensurate with their experience and what their responsibilities are and all of that. They want health insurance, because in this country, that's the only way really that they can guarantee to have health insurance. So they want health insurance, and then there's retirement, and there's all these pieces that have to do with money. But on the other side of compensation, what employees really want is they want flexibility. One of the things that we've seen a lot of since the pandemic started is that companies that always insisted that you couldn't do the work remotely have learned that, in fact, yes, their employees can actually still do their work and can be counted on to do their work, even from their own house, even, with wearing pajamas on the bottom, like, right? So that the flexibility to be not only have their attention on their work, but to also be there as part of their family, or part of the other responsibilities that they have in life besides their responsibility to their job. So that's a big one, is flexibility. Another one is they want to feel like they matter. We all want to feel like we matter. They want to feel like they matter. And part of feeling like they matter is, first of all, recognition, right? Being told and being words of affirmation. I always go back to the love languages, because while they're really designed for relationships, romantic relationships, if you really think about what makes people feel good, what makes people feel like they matter, is to make sure that they know that you think that they matter, that their contribution counts, also that you trust them. I think one of the biggest mistakes or biggest issues that employers and employees have is that business owners, they started their business by having a finger in every pie and making it all happen and being in control and doing all that stuff, right? But then you get to this point where you're adding people to come help you, to come be hands, right? To come and to do the things that you're delegating better than you do it. But in order for that to work, is you have to trust them to know how to do their job. That you hired a person who actually knows what they're doing, and then you have to trust them to know how to do it. Your job is to say, well, this is the result that we're looking for, not to tell them how to do things, right? So trust is a really big one. Another one is belonging. I say that a lot, but what does belonging actually mean? Like, you want to feel like that you're a team in it together. So there's this research that has been done. It's really funny because it actually was done around first year law associates and really big law firms. But it turns out that if you're working really on a project that is hard, and it can be hard in a variety of ways, right? So it can be long hours, and it can be intense work, but whatever it is, it's beyond, it pushes your comfort zone a little bit. What happens is that the people who are doing it fall in love with each other. And they become really intimate, right? And they feel like they did this really hard thing together, and it feeds them. This is what people are looking for in work. They want to feel like they're doing something together, something that might be hard, but they're in it, and their contribution counts. The way they think counts. They're helpful. Other people are on their side. They're with each other. And I think that that's something that gets overlooked all the time, is that while sometimes, some of the jobs that need to be done in a business can be not all that exciting, right? They can be kind of boring sometimes. And yet that no matter what it is, it's an integral piece of getting to the result of that business. And so if you want to make sure that your employee knows how integral they are and how appreciated and valued they feel. So that can come in many ways, like, yes, of course you can throw money at them. And that's not a bad thing. But there are other things that people want, sometimes even more, that are, okay, I'm just going to give you an example, which is really cheesy. Okay. And I know it's really cheesy, but when there are places that have like employee of the month, whatever, right? Well, for some people, that's like a really big deal, that recognition. People thrive on being recognized. People thrive on being acknowledged by their colleagues, not even from their boss, but from their colleagues. When other people that you are working with notice that you're doing a really good job. Well, how does that happen? The employer, the business owner's job is to create and foster a container in which that is an expected way of working with one another. Is we point out when people are doing a great job. We point out when somebody does something that makes your job more easier to do, right? So those are the kinds of things that when people are talking about being fulfilled or wanting more than just money, and words don't cost money, but they do have a cost, right? Because people can tell if you're bullshitting. People can tell if you're doing things just as a tactic. Tactics don't work. Authentic recognition, authentic appreciation, actually people feel that in the heart, and that has more currency, as far as I can tell, as far as I can see. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Yeah. I mean, a follow-up question would be, in terms of having a business or being the business owner, one of the things I've experienced, so I know, but I was one of the partners at a local law firm here. And what I really found to be true is that, being a really good leader is not easy. And so I'm wanting to plug your services a little bit, Dana, in terms of, if you're sort of struggling with how do I create that kind of culture where employees feel like they belong. How do you work with clients on sort of developing those leadership skills? I'm throwing you a curveball here. Sorry.
No, that's great, because so it's a process, right? Like, you don't wake up and all of a sudden learn a few lessons and then you're a leader. It's both a what to do, but even more than that, it's who to be. And in growing your ability to be bigger, that's such a weird sentence, but in growing your ability to hold a bigger container, for instance, and actually lead, takes practice. It takes oftentimes changing the way you think about your place and who you are in respect to your employees, or in respect to the company, or even honestly in respect to the title that you've got. So you've got it. So there's ways where you have to kind of shift how you're looking at the entire thing in order to be able to show up and lead. I have a client, Molly Earl, she's just amazing. And when we've known each other for years, and when we first started working together, she had just been named the CEO of her company, of which she owns with her brother, right? So she's owned the business, but he was the CEO, and he said to her, no, Molly, you've got to be the CEO, because my job is like, I have a different job here. This is your job. And she was like, what? I'm a teacher. I was a teacher. I'm not a CEO. I was a teacher. How do I do this? And over a period of 9 months, I really got her to see that there was no one way or preferred way to lead, that you get to lead from your own strengths. You get to be you and lead, but you have, right? You have to actually be comfortable with the fact that maybe you're not Oprah, you're Molly. You're not an extrovert, you're an introvert. You're a nurturer, not an orator. And now it's been like 2 years. Well, first of all, to hear her brother talk about her leadership at the company actually made me cry. But because it's so amazing, not how the employees feel about her and what they will do for the company because she leads them in this way, and she's totally nurtures them. It's so awesome. So that's part of it. And the other thing that I do on a regular basis is help both the owner of the company and their team go through this process where we identify the company values. And with everybody who's been there for a while is involved in this process so that the employees are as much or even more part of the process than the business owner themselves. And we come up with these values, or we uncover the values, and then we define the values, and we talk a lot about their place in the business and what it means, and how it means that how it impacts, or how the work of the business comes out of these values and how they're part of it. And then every week for at their weekly company meetings, they pick one of those values and they talk about it in the meeting, and people bring their ideas, and they talk about how that value showed up in the work in the last week, and it becomes this really living thing, and that is leadership. Does that?
Yeah, that's a great example.
Yeah. So, okay. So, we've talked about all the things that we've talked about, like having, once you have a person that is an employee, like you've gotten that part. I want to go back even to the beginning, which is like, what can you and can you not say or ask in a job description or an interview?
Yeah, great question. And so I want to also just sort of, in my mind and in my world, there's a little bit of a difference between a job description and a job ad. And I want to talk about both. They serve different functions. And so job description from a legal perspective is really the way in which you are giving your employee and communicating again with your employee about sort of what your expectations are for their performance, why they're there, what you're hoping that they'll do. And that has consequences in a number of different scenarios. And so I was going to just kind of walk through kind of the general things that are in a job description, and then I'll talk a little bit more about a job ad, which is a little bit different. So in a job description, just sort of talking about the top thing that comes through that'll be in your job description is, so first thing I wanted to say is that there's no law that requires that you have a job description. However, I really, really strongly recommend it. And that's partly because if legal issues arise, you've got documentation. So another mentor of mine once said, one of the things, the top three rules in employment matters are document, and document. And so this is really one of those things where you're wanting to document that you made your expectations clear, and that you provided them to the employee, and there was an agreement about what was supposed to happen if it didn't happen that way. And so just sort of starting with the top thing that comes in a job description is the job title, which may seem like it's sort of not all that meaningful, but there are a few things that you really want to think about. And so I think there's a trend now, and I've seen this in a few sort of newer companies, to just give everyone a C-suite title. There's the chief everything officer and the chief happiness officer and everything. And that's fine, and I love it, and I love the spirit and the heart behind it. Just to be aware that there are legal consequences in some cases. So there are certain areas in which anyone who has a C-level title could be held personally liable for something that happens at the company. So I'm not necessarily saying don't do it, but just think about it, about whether that's something you really want to do. The other thing to think about in the job title is, for purposes of FLSA, again, that's the Fair Labor Standards Act that sets federal minimum wage. There's an Oregon statute that also sets the Oregon minimum wage, but in those statutes, you generally need to make a distinction between an exempt employee and a non-exempt employee. So non-exempt employees are entitled to minimum wage, and then they're entitled to generally 1.5 times pay for overtime for over 40 hours a week. Exempt employees are not entitled to that. They're generally not entitled to overtime, but they are entitled to be paid in any week in which they perform any work at all. So these are your sort of typical, more white collar salaried positions. And so, there are, again, benefits and drawbacks to both types of arrangements. But with respect to job titles, what I wanted to just really clarify is, just because you put manager in a job title of a position, that does not necessarily make them an exempt employee. So the non-exempt exempt analysis goes deeper than just whether you call somebody a manager or not. The second part of a job description generally is what the essential functions of the job are. And again, this is a documentation issue. You want to make sure that you've really clarified what it is that you really, really need from this person. Why are you hiring them? And my advice, again, would be to just really sort of narrow that down, really only put the essential job functions in there. And not your ideal sort of, I hope this person can answer phones, and really what the essential job functions are. This is used in legal terms in terms of, like, if you have a disabled employee who might need an accommodation, you're going to want to be doing that analysis in terms of, can they still perform the essential functions of the job, maybe with a reasonable accommodation, and so that the ability of whether that's going to work or not is going to be looked at in terms of what are the essential job functions. It also is important in terms of discipline. You're wanting, if an employee isn't performing the essential job functions, it's going to be helpful for you to have that document that says, you knew up front this was something you were supposed to be doing, right? Also related is sort of physical requirements, and then skills and knowledge required. Again, you're going to want to have these be really related to those essential functions of the job, so that they're consistent with the rest of your document. And then also I talked a little bit about disability accommodation. You want to make clear what those requirements are, again, so that if you have a person with a disability, you're able to make the analysis of, is there a reasonable accommodation that you can make that will allow them to perform those essential functions. So that's awesome. Job descriptions. That's a little bit different than job ads. And so some people will, a job ad can kind of look like a job description, and some people just use the two interchangeably, and that's fine. The one thing you really want to look at with ads, so a job description can be more of an internal document. A job ad is where you're really advertising to try to get people to apply for the job. And so in that case, one of the major issues I think about is really the discrimination issues. And so you don't want to say anything that would limit a person's ability to apply for the job based on race, religion, gender, national origin, all of those sort of protected categories. The one exception there is sort of if it's a bona fide occupational qualification, or a BFOQ. And these are, you should know that those are really, really rare. It's really, really rare to show that one of those protected statuses is actually a BFOQ. The one that I use that I think works is that if you're a religious school, you can require that a teacher at that, or an employee at that school, is a member of the religion. That's a bona fide occupational qualification. Now, you might not be able to require that a janitor at that school is is a member of that religion, because that's less, necessary. So, and then the other thing to think about, so I think one of the common mistakes that sometimes people make is age is one of those protected classes in employment. And so, when you're writing your job ad, you don't want to say something like, we're looking for someone young and enthusiastic. What you want to say is, we're looking for someone who's really motivated. So that's something where people can go astray. And then the other point we talked about a little bit earlier is that at-will status. You want to make sure that your job ad doesn't do anything to change the at-will status if you're not intending to. So this one is really tricky. So even statements like, we want all of our employees to be with us long-term, that can call into question your at-will status. We're looking for somebody, who wants to grow with us. That can also arguably, be a factor in making it look like you don't have that at-will status, should you want it at the time. And so you just need to be really, really careful. I always say the best thing to do is also put in there very clearly, this is an at-will position, because then it's less reasonable for the person to interpret that statement or any of your statements, in a contrary manner.
That's a great answer. It's awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Do you have any more for me?
Yes. Oh, so we've talked about how in the Great Resignation we've got a lot of, and also in new workplaces we've got a lot more remote work, and so I'm wondering if you have any tips for leaders about how to maintain the sense of communication and accountability that you need in a work environment.
Yeah, I was thinking a lot about this because it's different for different companies. It's especially hard if people are remote internationally because of time zones and when people start work and whatever. But if people are remote and they're within 2 time zones, there are, or 3, everybody's going to be at work together at some point, even if they're in their own house on their own computers. And so one of the things that I actually find really helpful is a daily huddle, where you just get together for 15 minutes every day and start off with, one word about how you're feeling that day and like any wins you had the day before and what are you working on what's your plan of action for the day? And then the last question is, is there anywhere that you specifically think you need support in the work that you're going to do today? So that just staying connected in that way, I think is really important. And the other thing is maybe, once a month to have a time during, on a Friday afternoon before work is done, or where people can come in, where you have a meeting that isn't so focused on activity, but focused more on getting to know each other, where there's a question. So Molly, again, my client who is so amazing at this, every week she comes up with a question that has people delve into what they think about this, or what do they feel about this, or something silly about what they did that week, or, getting to know them and their families, because while they do have a core, I think 4 people in their physical office here, they have 10 people who live all over the country who work remotely. And so that actually really works. If you try to take some focus off of just the work and add in some of the personal stuff that people used to do, around the water cooler, right? Or over the cubicle wall, or the getting to know each other as people, not just as colleagues. I also think, if you can afford it, or if you're a business that can allow for this, is actually to do a offsite retreat once a year, or not even a retreat, an event. Go bowling, or everybody go somewhere that where the flight is, I always think, I know this is really silly because I hate Las Vegas, but the flights to Las Vegas are the cheapest in the country because they're subsidized by the casinos. And so, right, so it's easy and cheap to get there. And take your people somewhere where you can hang out in the same house for a little bit, right? Yeah, laser tag.
I love that. Yeah.
I will say, Jen is one of my favorite people and a client, and the way she also has her leadership has blossomed over the last 2 years, and now she has a team, and she has a leadership team they're also learning how to lead, and it's just such a pleasure to watch people step into their power as employers in a way that they become better people and their employees like really enjoy working for them. Like, that's just amazing.
That's amazing.
So, yeah. I was going to ask you about firing people, but it really has to do with being at will. And you've talked a lot about being at will, so I'm not going to do that. But I am going to ask you this. So many, 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 many business owners out there who need a lawyer don't have one. Right? And for all sorts of reasons, they think that they don't really need one for a while, then they don't think that they can afford it. And my response has always been, you need a lawyer way before you think you need a lawyer. You need a lawyer before you need a lawyer, right? You need to be protected. And so how can people find you, Kate?
Yeah, so I am practicing on my own now. And there are lots of good lawyers out there. I'm happy to work with people, but so my information, I'm at kilberglaw.com, and my email address is kate@kilberglaw.com. But I absolutely agree. I will say, I tend to be really, really honest with people, to a fault almost, where I'll say, you don't need to pay me for that. You can go you can go do that on your own, right? I know Dana's rolling her eyes at me. But I also, I really just genuinely want to feel like the money that I'm earning is because I'm providing value. So I'm not going to, you're always welcome to call me, shoot me an email. If I'm not the right person, or if I think it's something you can do on your own and it's not worth spending the money, I'm a business owner myself. I understand budgets. I understand revenue. I understand all of that. And so I try to really be careful about, making sure that you're using my services in a wise way. And I know that there are other lawyers out there that do that as well. One of the things I think is a great idea is just to find a lawyer that you like, somebody. And then I always suggest people will go in and meet with their lawyer once a year, for an hour at least, and just kind of tell them what's going on, what issues are coming up in the business, kind of do just an issue spotting meeting, so that the lawyer knows who they are, knows their business, knows what might be coming up. You might want to look at your employee handbook every year or two. And so in those cases, I think a lot of people also feel like a lawyer is going to cost me thousands of dollars no matter what I do. I do 1 hour consults, which is a few $100s. And, I'm happy to kind of answer all those easy questions in that hour. And that's sort of a nice middle ground between just guessing and going it alone, and and hiring a lawyer to do the thing for you. So you might also want to find a lawyer that's willing to do just an hour consult and answer some questions for you that you might have.
It's awesome. And I'm going to put the link and her business name down below, so you'll be able to find it. 'Cause I think there was a little weird glitch in the audio, but I'll put it down there. And again, if you're watching this on replay and you have any questions about either what we talked about, or you have other questions, just put them below and we'll come back and answer them. Thank you so much, Kate. That was really, really fun. I really appreciate it. And I hope to see you soon and talk to you again soon. Have a great weekend.
Thanks so much for having me, Dana. Take care.
Have a great long weekend, everybody. Bye.